So, of course, I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're talking about what's new in Onshape. And if this is your first time in a What's New webinar, once a month we have a webinar just to discuss the past update or updates in the previous month. So, we're going to be discussing the new features that you'll find in Onshape as of the last few weeks that have been added. Now, as I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and we'll do our best to stop and answer questions from time to time. All right, so let's get into things. Now, before I get into the topic of the day, there are always a few things that I like to mention in general, and one of the first is our mission statement. If you're new to Onshape, our goal with Onshape is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere, and this includes mobile devices. So you can download the Onshape app for Android or iOS and actually have a real full-functioning CAD tool on your phone or your tablet. So you can create sketches and features and parts and assemblies from a mobile device. But it also means working anywhere, Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks. You really have accessibility to that CAD data from anywhere you're at on any device. The other element of this is working together, working collaboratively. So if you haven't shared a document in Onshape yet, it's definitely one of the biggest benefits. You're working collaboratively on the same set of data rather than being isolated with separate files. So again, everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. That's our mission. Now, the other thing I always like to mention is we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, you generally think of parts, assemblies, and drawings. And we do have parts, assemblies, and drawings. But we also have a lot of other things that you don't get in other professional 3D CAD systems. Some things that really set us apart. One of the first and very important to what we're talking about here today is just the frequent updates. You know, with Onshape, roughly every 3 weeks, you're going to see new features being added. That's what, of course, what we're talking about here today. So it's not something that you'll see once a year. You're going to see roughly 14 times a year new features being added to Onshape. So really cool stuff, something that is really unique to Onshape. The other thing I always like to stress about the updates is that you don't have to do anything. You log in, new features are there. There's no downloads or updates or installs or any of those things that you have to deal with. The next thing to mention is built-in version control. In other professional 3D CAD systems, this is something that you have to manage separately, often purchase separately, sometimes referred to as PDM, Product Data Management Systems. It's really a tool to manage all those files. The idea behind Onshape is that capability is built into the core. It's not something that you have to manage, install, purchase separately. So with Onshape comes built-in version control. Also the ability to import and export common CAD formats. So if you've come from other CAD systems and you're familiar with, a certain file format, maybe a Parasolid or a SolidWorks or Inventor, chances are we can import and work with that data. We can also export to a long list of formats as well. So we can export to a lot of different other systems. And it means that Onshape works really well alongside existing CAD systems. There's a tool to share with others because it's easy for them to export maybe to the format they prefer. So again, import and export common CAD formats that are available. I've already briefly discussed the next one, and that is entirely new methods of collaboration. If you haven't shared a document in Onshape, definitely give it a shot. You click the share icon on the top right, enter an email address, define their permissions, and you can collaborate with someone else in real time on the same model. So unlike any other CAD system, you can work together on the same model and have everything update in real time. So entirely new methods of collaboration. It's not just real-time collaboration. It's things like integrated comments and follow mode and other little things that we've done to make that collaborative experience really unique. The last thing I want to mention is customization with FeatureScript. If you're at all interested in writing code, FeatureScript is a programming language that Onshape developed that allows you to build your own CAD feature. No different than the CAD features that you're using today that are in the toolbar. So you can build an Onshape feature that looks and feels just like Onshape's native features for yourself. And they could be used for all kinds of different things. But definitely do a search if you're interested. You'll find lots of content on FeatureScript. It's a programming language that allows you to create your own CAD feature. Very unique to Onshape. All right, so enough getting started. What are we talking about here today? And of course, the goal today is to talk about the updates and the process of updates and what's in those updates. And the one thing I want to stress for those new users out there is just that Onshape itself is updated roughly every 3 weeks. So along with this webinar, we're going to be doing another one next month to discuss the updates in the past 3 weeks. So this is going to be a never-ending thing for us. And again, you don't have to do anything. They're automatic and transparent. They're done in the background. So it's really unique to Onshape. It means that everyone's always on the latest version in Onshape. You never have a scenario where are you using an older version of Onshape. That doesn't exist. Everyone using Onshape is on that same version. Now, of course, what we're talking about here today is with these updates comes new functionality. So, you don't have to do anything. You log in and new features will be there. And it means that we evolve at a very quick rate. And what we're going to talk about here today is all that new functionality that you'll see or that we saw in May. All right, so let's get into it. Now, the agenda today is pretty straightforward. The last time that we had a What's New webinar was, I believe, May 2nd. And a few days after that webinar, we had an update. So on May 5th, we had an update. And we also had another update on May 25th. So May 5th and May 25th are both updates we're going to cover in this webinar. So there's been 2 updates in the month of May that we're going to discuss. Now, I won't get into every minute detail just for the sake of time. What I'm going to do is pick a few improvements to walk through and really give you an idea of why these can help. Now, of course, with all the webinars that we do, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to stop and address them. One question that I see already, can you share specific parts, drawings within a document separately, i.e. for suppliers who do not need to see all of the design? No, not as of today. When you share a document, it's at the document level. What I have seen others use is just the ability to derive in a part or into a separate document and share that separately. But that is something that we're aware of. The ability to share a tab, for instance, is something that's been requested by many. So definitely something that's on our radar for new functionality. If you need to do this today, I'd recommend something like a derived into another document that you control separate. All right, so these are the 2 updates, May 5th, May 25th, and we're going to start, of course, with May 5th. Now, May 5th was definitely a big update, and you're going to kind of see a theme between these 2 updates. In the month of May, we announced a lot of new functionality around both surfacing and specifically curves. Curves are kind of the key, the core piece of complex surfacing, and that's what we're working on right now. So composite curves, 3D fit splines, and a number of other curve features have been added as of late. Now, on May 5th specifically, composite curve and 3D fit spline. These are both really key functionality if you're trying to create more organic shapes that require a lot of curvature. Now, it wasn't all about curves and surfaces. There's also some really key updates to Sheetmetal specifically. So if you do Sheetmetal design, this is one that was very much a troublesome thing for users as we first launched Sheetmetal, is just the ability to fill it an edge of a Sheetmetal part, for instance, or a chamfer. Now you can do that. I'll show you an example of it, but again, very simple. Another one that was commonly requested is I need to export to Dxf or DWG of my flat view without creating a drawing. In the past, you had to create a drawing, blank drawing, drop in a flat view, and then export that to Dxf. So it wasn't an ideal workflow. Now you can just right-click from the flat view and choose Export as Dxf. Question, can I import a Dxf, then convert it to a sketch in a part studio and extrude it into a 3D model? Yes, you can. Import the Dxf into a document and then start a sketch, and in the toolbar you'll see an Insert Dxf option, and that will allow you to drop the Dxf into a sketch. If you shared a document by sharing the link, how do you then revoke that share? You can cancel the link. So if you go back to the share dialog, you go back to the link tab, you'll see an X next to it where you can cancel the link. And if you click that, the link is invalid, right? So it no longer works. All right, so moving on now. Sheetmetal, Phillip, Chamfer, export Dxf DWG, really tailored towards the sheetmetal crowd, those creating sheetmetal parts. The next few, though, are big for anyone, and especially if you're trying to organize your metadata, properties, drawing templates, and so on. List type properties, the ability to create a list and then have a user select from a list when selecting custom properties. So when you're creating a custom property, you can now choose an option for list and give the user, whoever it may be, a list of options to choose from to create that property. Something that was requested if you're doing a lot of, again, managing that metadata within Onshape. The next thing, insert Dxf or DWG in Onshape drawings. This is a new command that allows you to essentially drop in a Dxf or DWG into an Onshape drawing. And this is really useful in the scenario of creating a template or working with templates. So if you've come from other CAD systems and you have a DWG file or DXF file that was your template, you can just drop that into an Onshape drawing, save that as a template, and you're off and running with your Onshape template. So just trying to speed up that process of creating drawing templates with Onshape. The last thing that I want to mention, and this is particularly for those that do a lot of the geometric tolerancing, there was a limitation in the past that we couldn't create a composite tolerance. So if you needed to do 2 rows with a composite, that was a limitation in the past. It is no longer the case. There's a new option when you create that second row for composite. All right, so these are the big updates, the big things that I wanted to mention in this May 5th update. Now, the composite curve, I imagine, is going to be probably one of the biggest, although you could argue maybe if you had to do sheetmetal, some of the sheetmetal improvements will be big. But I do want to start with composite curve. I think that's a good one. And I wanted to show an example where it can really solve a problem. Now, think of composite curve as, I want to take a series of lines, arcs, edges, curves. I want to take a combination of these things and make them into one thing. And you may ask, well, why is that useful? Why would I need a line and an arc and a line and so on to be one entity? And I think it's particularly useful in a command like Loft. Let me give you an example why. Here I have the Loft command. I want a loft to create kind of this funnel shape, right? So I select my loft profiles. Now what I really want here is this loft to follow this line, arc, and line that I've sketched. The problem that I have is, if I go to choose guide and I start to select them, it's going to assume that it's one entity that connects them. So I can't just select all 3 of these and say that's one guide. It's going to see that as 3 separate guides. So an easy answer to this is, instead of using line, arc, line to drive the guide, I can create a composite curve that consists of these 3 things and then use that curve as my guide. Now, this is just one example, but think of any scenario where I want to be able to click on one thing as a reference, and it's a combination of, again, maybe it's a curve plus some sketch geometry, or maybe it's a curve plus some edges of a model, and I want to be able to select it as one entity. Now, the composite curve command is very simple to use. You'll see it here in the toolbar. Left click, and then just select whatever it is that you want to be in your composite curve. In this case, line, arc, line, left click, and now I have a curve, a single entity that I can select that comprises those 3 selections. Again, I'm using sketch geometry. You could use edges, you could use curves, or any combination of those things. So, you're pretty free to select what you want, but the big benefit of this is now when I go do something like a loft, I can say this is one entity. When I go to do my guide, I can just click on the curve, and the curve makes up that guide selection, right? So this is something that I get asked often. How would I go about creating a guide where, I want it to be a combination of entities? That's composite curve. That's where you'll want to use a composite curve. The other thing I always like to mention about composite curve is you can combine a series of edges of a model, for instance, and use that curve to drive a loft. And the really unique thing about this is the composite curve is intelligent enough to know, okay, these are edges from a model, and I can match continuity or match tangency, right? So some really unique things here in the composite curve command, but just keep in mind any type of scenario like this where I need to combine entities together to make one thing, composite curve is the ideal scenario, right? So that's just one example. I could go through quite a few, but that is one new one that you'll see in the toolbar. And by the way, a lot of the new commands, these new functionality that we've been adding, you'll find in the drop down here on the far right of the toolbar. 3D Fit Spline, we're going to talk about in a moment. Projected curve, bridging curve, all of these are kind of geared towards that, more complex shapes. All right, so that is a simple example of a composite curve. Let's move on to the next one, and that is the 3D Fit Spline. As the name implies, it allows you to create a spline through a 3D spline through points. So this is not bound by a sketch plane, right? So this is one of those commands, again, like all the other curves that we've been talking about, that is 3D. And essentially it allows you to just select points and say pass a spline through these points, pass a 3D spline through these points. What's really unique about this is I can define or I can tune the start and end directions and magnitude and really kind of adjust the shape to get really what I'm looking for. An example I like to give for this is, something like maybe an exhaust manifold where I'm trying to, run these pipe sections down, and it's a 3D curve, obviously, right? And it's very much manipulated by the shape of the manifold and the actual exhaust pipe. So here's an example where I would use 3D Fit Spline. Now, it's a very simple command to use. You'll find it again under that same drop down in the toolbar, 3D Fit Spline. And you just select points. So point, 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 and you'll see it creates a 3D spline through those points. Now, naturally, you'll want to adjust the direction and other things here. So you can choose, you'll see start direction, end direction, and then you also have magnitude to actually control, the amount of adjustment that you're making. So I can say start direction, let's choose a construction line like this, and that will allow it to say, okay, parallel to this direction, right? In this case, just this construction line, but you can also choose like an edge of your model, for example. And you can see I can adjust the start magnitude. I can grab the arrow, and it's just going to adjust the amount of direction that I'm getting there, right? The magnitude of that. I can also set a factor, and I can also establish an end direction. Maybe I want it normal to this line, for instance, right? So again, you can manipulate the start and end of your 3D Fit Spline using the start and end directions, and then also adjust the magnitude, the amount of change that you see in the spline based on your start and end direction. So again, very simple command to use. Just left-click the points, define your start and end direction and magnitude, and you have your 3D Fit Spline. In this example, I would then take it, use it for a sweep or whatever it is that I was trying to accomplish here. Also very useful maybe in a loft as a guide, for example. So that is the 3D Fit Spline, really just a matter of selecting points, but really the detail there is controlling that start and end directions. All right, moving on to the next one on the list, Sheetmetal, Phillip, and Chamfer. And this is definitely going to be the easiest one to show you here today. It's something that was a limitation and required users to do quite a workaround. It was not a simple thing. And it's a relatively simple task, so it was definitely something that's frustrated users when we first launched Sheetmetal. But it was something that we fixed very early on. I think it was only an issue for a month or two, and that is the ability to just simply fillet the corners of sheet metal parts, right? In the past, this was a limitation. You had to finish the sheet metal, which wasn't really useful if I needed to then export to Dxf and actually wanted to laser cut the fillets in. So again, just keep in mind now when you select Phillip and Chamfer and select the edge of a sheet metal part, it just works. Phillip or Chamfer, they both work, of course, the same way. It works just as you'd expect it to, just as it does in a normal, solid part. So that was a limitation, and users would literally sketch in arcs and create cuts and all kinds of workarounds. Now you don't have to do that, right? I just select fillet, select the corners, and I'm good to go. Now, we added this in the May 5th update, but we also improved it in the May 25th update. I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but one big improvement that we made to that is just how you select those edges. I'm going to come back to that. All right, so that's a simple one. Again, Sheetmetal, fillet, and chamfer. You just select your edges. It now works, so there's nothing really more to get into on that. The next one that I wanted to discuss is exporting a DXF from the flat view. This is something that anyone who does sheet metal needs to do at some point, right? If you're going to actually have this manufactured, you need to have it cut, whether that's laser cut, water jet, whatever it may be. The format that everyone needs is a DXF of the flat pattern, and the way to do that is now from the flat view. In the past, you had to create a drawing, export the drawing as DXF, and then take that into your laser cutter software, whatever it was. Now you can go straight from the flat view. So if I right click the flat view, you'll see export DXF/DWG of flat pattern. You'll get the export options. You can say export DXF and specify your version. And there is an option to set zero height and normals to positive if you have any kind of import issues. Some CAM software, some DXF import software has issues with those. Give that a shot. But otherwise, very simple. Just click export. It exports a DXF. So no longer need to create a drawing, export the drawing as DXF. That's no longer necessary. Just right click the flat view and you'll see that option in the right click menu. All right, so that is the export DXF DWG from a flat view. Now the next one, I'm not going to get into a big example of it. I think it's fairly straightforward if you're doing this type of work, and that is, if I'm managing my properties in Onshape, if I go into the workspace properties here and we start looking into all the various properties of my part, you'll see description, title, and so on, part number, state, vendor, project, all these different bits of metadata, and you can create your own custom properties as part of a company. So if you have company-wide properties, you can create them. What's really unique about this update is you can create your own list type properties. So if maybe you have a property you like to store, whether it's you manufacture it, you purchase it, right? And I want the user to choose one or the other, and not to type in purchased or not to type in manufactured, but to choose from a list, purchased or manufactured. And this is just an example, but think of any scenario where I want the user to choose it from a list of options, not type something in, but choose from a list. That's where list type properties are really useful. I give the example of state because think of state, you would have states like in progress, released, obsolete. These are different states that you'd want the user to choose from, a list of options that you'd want the user to choose from. So if you're managing your company, you're a company admin managing your properties, just realize you have a new option for a list type property that allows you to control what's available as choices. So very cool stuff. Again, really tying down to really, I shouldn't say tying down, but really specific to companies and companies creating their own custom properties. All right, so let's move on. Now the next one that I wanted to mention is insert DXF DWG in Onshape drawings. And this is really critical if you're coming into Onshape and you need to create a custom drawing template. You have your own drawing template maybe in another format and you want to use it in Onshape. And we get that question asked often. I have this template. How do I bring it into Onshape and use it? And the answer is you can now insert a DXF directly into a drawing. And the workflow here would be you create a new drawing, blank drawing, no title, no border, nothing like that. And then you insert your DXF into that drawing on top of it. And then you have your drawing template. You can export that as a DWG, import it into a document, and you have a custom template that you brought in from some other CAD system. So the key to this, though, is importing your drawing template in DXF. So make sure to do that. Step one, import the Dxf first. Then you can create a drawing. I'm going to go custom template. We'll choose, let's say ANSI C. Do not include border or title block. I want a blank drawing, right? And we're just going to hit OK. And now what I can do is then take my Dxf that I've imported and just drop that into the Onshape drawing, right? You'll see a new command right here in the toolbar, insert Dxf or DWG, right? Again, make sure that you import the Dxf first. Otherwise, you won't see it listed here. But then it's just a matter of left-clicking, dropping it in, and there is my custom, Dxf template. And I could export this as a DWT, import that into a document, maybe a document called Drawing Templates, and it will forever be there as a drawing template option when I go to create my drawing. So I think the key thing here, if you have any other use for inserting Dxf, this of course works. So if you're just looking for a way to maybe insert a note or some logo or something along those lines, you can use that here too. But I think it's really useful in those scenarios of drawing templates. All right, so that is inserting a Dxf. Again, I'm showing you here with drawing templates, but use it in any scenario where you need to insert a Dxf into your drawing. The last one on my list that I wanted to mention in the May 5th update is just the ability to create a composite geometric tolerance. And this is a real simple one, but if you have more than one row, you're going to see in the geometric tolerance dialog a new option for composite. So if you need to create a composite tolerance, there's now an option to do this. In the past, you can create multiple rows, but there was no way to create a composite of them. So this is something that, if you do a lot of tolerancing and you do a lot of tolerance blocks like this, this is a big one for you. Users, really needed this one. So composite, just again, when you add a new row under the symbol, you're just going to see an option for composite. That's really the only new thing that you'll see, but it solves a big problem for a lot of drawing users out there. All right, so that is the last big update that I wanted to mention in this May 5th update. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, there were 2 updates in May, so let's get into the next one. Now, the next one, again, following that same theme that we were talking about earlier of surfaces and curvature and creating curves, we have some additional options in the Loft command. We have a show curvature option for curves like splines, for instance. You want to see the curvature and inflection points. You can now do that. Some general improvements that everyone will love. Things like named views in drawings. You can now insert named views that you created in your 3D model directly into Onshape drawings. That was one that I was asked many, many times. So definitely a big one there. Custom sheet sizes. If you just want to be able to create a drawing and tell it this is the size of my sheet, not according to some standard, I just want this size sheet, you can do that. You can actually type in a value for your custom sheet size. Forgive me. Drawing format locks. We added the ability to lock the format so that you don't inadvertently change the drawing format as you're creating drawings. Table grip points, another one. These are, again, just those small usability improvements that can make a big difference. If you do a lot of drawings, you can grab the table by different grip points. One that I mentioned briefly earlier is a selection filter for Sheetmetal, Phillip, and Chamfer. Now, at this point, you may not even notice this. This was only an issue for 3 weeks, but it was an issue when we launched the May 5th update. It added the ability to add Sheetmetal fillets on Sheetmetal parts. But the problem with it was it also allowed you to attempt to fillet the other edges, the edges you would never fillet on a Sheetmetal part. So with this update, we automatically turned on a filter that will only allow you to select the viable edges of a Sheetmetal part. It will not automatically start selecting all of the other edges that you would never fillet in a Sheetmetal part. So it's a small bit of usability improvement there. All right, so the last one, and this is probably one of the biggest, but it's one of the most subtle as well, and that is just sheer graphics performance. And I think this is going to impact large assemblies more than anything else. But in general, you're going to see better large assembly performance, whether that be rotate, pan, zoom, and just interacting with large assemblies in Onshape should be faster. Now, we add performance improvements every update. So performance updates are never unique to Onshape. We do that with every update. We don't always announce them because a lot of times they're really subtle. Things like we made switching this faster, or we made adding properties faster. Little things like that you really wouldn't notice. This is a big performance improvement. This isn't a subtle thing. This is something that if you've used big assemblies in the past in Onshape, I really encourage you to try opening them again and just see the difference in the impact and speed. Namely, again, rotate, pan, zoom. If you're working with large assemblies, I think that's really where you're going to notice it. It's not a option or a setting or anything that you need to do. It's just big assemblies should be faster. Definitely give it a shot, especially if you've worked with them in the past and you found, oh, when I tried to rotate it lagged a bit. Try it now. Definitely give it a shot because we're seeing some really big improvements in graphics performance. This isn't a subtle change. It's something that's pretty big. So definitely give that a shot. Again, open up those big assemblies and try them out and see what you think of the improvements. But if I had to name, 3 big improvements, Loft with Path is going to be a big one. The ability to control a loft via a path automatically just saves a lot of time, a lot of constructing of profiles. Show curvature is another big one. If you are very particular about the curvature that you create between geometry, you're really concerned with inflection points and the magnitude of the curvature and so on. That's going to be a big one. Named views in drawings is probably, at least in my opinion, probably one of the biggest in this update. It's something that a lot of users have asked for. If you've ever wanted, a drawing view that looked a certain way, but when you created a drawing that wasn't in the list of default views, this solves that problem. And I'll show you what I mean in just a second, so bear with me. All right, so enough talk. Let's jump into Loft with Path and discuss it. Now, the example I like to give is this squeegee, and I've used this example in a few different Loft examples because it shows a sharp transition from a circle to a square, which is kind of quintessential Loft. But what you may have also seen in the past is me using a whole series of guides and rather complex setup to create the Loft transition that I want. Now, one big thing that a lot of users requested is the ability to control a loft via a single path and a single entity. And what you'll have is, in this latest update, that option. So what you'll see is a new checkbox for path. And it's pretty straightforward. Again, you select your profiles just as you normally would. So let's choose profile here, profile there, and we'll loft between them. What you'll see again is this new checkbox for path. And as the name implies, you choose the path. What's really unique about this is it will automatically create all those profiles along that path, right? Gradually giving you that contour, that transition that you're looking for. This can be a real time saver over creating, a lot of unique guides, right? That's where I think this really is useful. I might have to create 4 separate guides in this scenario to get a very similar shape in the past. And so definitely something to consider if you have, a scenario like this where it's largely symmetric. That's a piece of it. You can have, something that transitions in this way, right? The neat thing about this, again, is you get all of those independent sections, right? You can see the section count here. Just a real time saver, something that gives you a real unique shape, and it's not very complicated, right? And just a single path defines the loft rather than combination of multiple guides. So again, trying to drive home that theme of more organic shapes, more difficult to create shapes done easily in Onshape. Path, the option for path in Loft definitely ties in with that theme. All right, so this is the Loft with path. Again, the thing that's new is the checkbox for path. You'll see section counts where you can define the number of sections along the path that you want, but otherwise very simple command to use, and definitely something I would try first rather than constructing a combination of guides. That this is kind of the first thing that I might try and do to control that shape. Of course, my last resort being constructing all those guides. All right, so enough on the loft with path. Let's move on to the next one, and that is show curvature. And we'll jump back to the loft with path example, but just show you the curvature of this path. So if I right-click, in this case, a spline, this sketch 17 is just a single sketch with a spline, you'll see the option to show curvature. Right? As the name implies, it then shows you the curvature of whatever you've selected. Right? So a very commonly asked question, especially again tying into the theme of more complex lofts, more complex surfacing, curves. You want to know the curvature of the curves, where the inflection points are. Right? I can see where my inflection point is here just by looking at that curvature. So the other thing to keep in mind, it's in the right-click menu. So you see right-click, show curvature. To turn it off, you would select the X next to the dialog here, right? And that turns off show curvature. So if you're really concerned with the curvature or where inflection points are in your design, especially useful in lofts and surfacing, just realize it's now in that right-click menu. And that was added as of the May 25th update. All right, moving on. The next one on my list, named views in drawings. And I think this is really useful for a lot of people, not just specific to one type of work or one type of modeling, but really if you're creating drawings of non-orthogonal views, you're going to need something like this. Now, we've had projected views, we've had auxiliary views, we've had other tools to create views that may not be standard, quote unquote, but we've never had a tool that's kind of universal that allows you to insert just about any view that you want. And that's kind of what this does. This allows you to take any kind of view that you want and any kind of orientation that you want, capture it as a view and insert that into a drawing. Now, the way we do this, and the example I like to give with this is here's a drive shaft, right? And you can see that I have a keyway in my drive shaft. And of course, when I go to create my drawing, I want to create a drawing that details out or defines the dimensions for that keyway in the drive shaft. But what happens if my view isn't looking straight at that keyway? Let me give you an example. So let's say that I insert the view. Let's go to insert view. We'll choose our drive shaft, and we'll insert a view. Now, of course, I can project views, but what you'll quickly realize when I do that is now I'm going to define the keyway, but the keyway is at a 45-degree angle relative to the top view, right? And what I'd really like is that keyway normal to the view. I'm looking straight at the keyway, not at this angle. The problem is front, top, right, all of these default options that you'll see in the dropdown, none of them work. None of them will give me that orientation at that exact angle that I'm looking for. So a solution to this is a named view. If we go back to the drive shaft, the key is creating that named view, right? So what I'm going to do, just a tip, I'm going to go normal to the sketch plane the keyway is created on, and I can just use the arrow key down in 45-degree increments. That gives me 90 degrees rotation from that sketch plane, right? So now I'm looking straight at the keyway. The key here is, of course, just get the part or assembly into the orientation that you want. A combination of maybe normal to a face and then rotating a couple of times, or maybe it's just normal to a face and you get it in that position. But get the model into the position that you want, then create a named view. So in the View Tools drop down here, you see Named View. Give your view a name. Click plus, right? Make sure to give it a name. Click plus, and now you have the keyway named view. Now that ability, the ability to create named views, is not new. What's new is the ability to then take that and insert it into the drawing. So when I go back here, I can then go Insert and choose the keyway named view from the dropdown, right? So again, just keep in mind any kind of scenario where I drop the default views in and they aren't what I want. I need it rotated X amount, or I just need to see it in this custom orientation. Especially common if you work with any kind of imported geometry or multi-part studios where the orientation isn't always clear. The ability to create named views can really save you a lot of time, make it simple to create those views that you're looking for. Named views themselves are not new. The ability to create named views has been in Onshape for a while. The new bit is just the ability to choose those views in the drop-down when you're inserting views in your drawing. Right? So named views and drawings, the moment you create a new named view, you're going to see it in the drop-down, and you can insert it into your drawing. Think of any kind of scenario where you want a custom orientation in your drawing. The next two I don't have necessarily. Oh, I shouldn't say that. Custom sheet size I will get into. Drawing format and lock are very straightforward, but just keep in mind you can now lock the format down of your drawing. You can also grab different grip points for drawing tables. I do want to mention just briefly, forgive me here, jumping around. Just briefly here, the option to choose a custom sheet size. So if you don't want a standard sheet size, a standard A, B, C, D, whatever it may be, or the ISO standards, you just want a custom sheet size. You want to enter in a value for the height and width of your drawing. You can do that. You can specify custom, enter in the value. The title block and the border will even scale to match it. So it's fairly intuitive, and it's very much ties into that locking down the format that we were talking about earlier. But just keep in mind, when you right-click a drawing and you go to Sheet Properties, under Size, you've always had the standard options. What's new is this option for Custom, where you can then enter in height and width. So if you have a need for custom sheet sizes, definitely check that out. The neat thing about this is it doesn't mess up the border. It doesn't mess up the title block. It's intuitive enough to know how to scale to match it. All right, so let's move on. Question. Is there a limit on custom sheet size? Could I set it to a full size sheet of plywood? I don't see why not. I'm not aware of a limitation, so forgive me. I haven't personally tried it to tell you for 100% certain, but I'm not aware of a limit to the size, no. All right, one of the things that I wanted to get into is just a simple selection filter for Sheetmetal. So this sounds really simple, and it is, but it's something that when we added the May 5th update of the ability to add fillets and chamfers to Sheetmetal, it's something that a lot of users requested, and that is just the ability to filter out the selections that I don't want. So if you look at this Sheetmetal part, let's say that I want to fillet this edge. Well, what happened as of the May 5th update is when you select fillet, for instance, and you come over here and mouse over geometry, it would allow you to select this edge or this edge or this edge, right? So obviously those are not edges I would ever want to fillet on a Sheetmetal part. That's not really practical, right? It's not something I do. I'd only want to fillet this edge. This sounds like a simple thing, but as you did a lot of Sheetmetal fillets, it was frustrating to have to constantly get exactly over a tiny edge just to select it. Now you can be zoomed way out and not have to worry about, oh, am I getting this edge and not this edge, right? So in short, when you go to create a fillet or chamfer and you mouse over a Sheetmetal part, you will only be able to select edges that are practical. Okay, you won't be able to select these edges for the model. And that was just something that users for a few weeks, gave us feedback on based on, adding that ability to fill in general. So that was a small improvement, but I think a big one if you do a lot of Sheetmetal design. That was something that frustrated users. I would never do that why not just remove it from the selections? All right, so that is a small usability improvement. I think the big thing is you don't have to zoom way in to find the exact edge just because you're worried about selecting this one and not that one, and so on. All right, so that is the improvements to Sheetmetal, Phillip, and Chamfer. Now, as I mentioned before, there is one more big improvement that I want to mention. I don't have an example of it. I think if you have a big assembly, open it. I think that's the big example that I would give you is, chances are it's going to be a lot faster when we talk about the graphics performance of it. Rotate, pan, zoom, just interacting with big models has gotten quite a bit better. Now, as I mentioned before, we add performance improvements in every update. There's quite a few in every update, but they're mostly, incremental, small improvements here and there. This was a rather large change to the graphics performance. So it's something that is really going to apply to users creating big assemblies. But if you're in that category, you should definitely open up a big assembly and give it a shot. You should see a pretty good size improvement and just the speed of that, working with the assembly. Zoom, pan, rotate, those kinds of graphic functions. All right. Question. Named view of a view with perspective does not appear to be available in drawings. That's a good point. I think you're correct. I haven't tried it myself, but that I believe if you create a named view, it's not going to honor the perspective state in the drawing. Use the feedback tool and let us know if that's a big one for you. I haven't tried that myself, but obviously I trust that you've tried it. Can you bring in named positions from assemblies and drawings? Yes, that's no different than the part. It's the same process I just walked you through. Just you would do it in the assembly tab and not the part. But yes. All right, everyone. That is what I had planned. I am going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. So if you have any questions, let me know. Type them into the questions dialog there in the GoToWebinar control panel. I will make sure to stick around and try and get all of them answered. But that's what I had planned. I want to say thank you, everyone, and have a good day.